Jack Mercer crouched behind a rusted sedan, his rifle pressed tight against his shoulder. The streets of Chicago were unrecognizable, draped in the sickly orange glow of distant fires. The skyline still stood, but it was hollow now, lifeless towers looming over a city of corpses. Somewhere nearby, a single moan rose, gurgling and wet. Then another. And another. He exhaled slowly, gripping his rifle tighter. The undead were close. Behind him, his small group huddled in the shadows of a collapsed storefront. 6 of them left now. 6 survivors clinging to life in a city that had already died. Lena, a former ER nurse, checked the pistol at her hip. "We need to move," she whispered, eyes darting toward the alley. "They're getting louder." "No," Damien hissed, his fingers twitching over his shotgun. "We don't even know what's down there." Jack glanced at the alleyway. It was narrow, littered with debris, and shrouded in darkness. A perfect trap. But staying here wasn't an option either. The groans were getting closer, and Jack knew what that meant: a horde was forming. "Trust me," he said. "We go now, single file. No noise." Damien muttered a curse, but fell in line. Jack took point, stepping over broken glass and shattered bones. The alley reeked of rot and old death, but at least it was empty. For now. Halfway through, Lena gasped. Jack turned just in time to see a figure lunge from the shadows. The thing had once been a man, but decay had warped it beyond recognition. Its mouth gaped open, teeth black with dried blood. Jack didn't hesitate. His knife flashed as he buried the blade into its skull, twisting hard. The body crumpled, but the damage was done. The sound echoed through the alley like a gunshot. And the city answered. From the street behind them, the groans became a roar. The shuffling of countless feet, the scrape of nails against concrete. Then the first of them rounded the corner, a dozen at least, their hollow eyes locking onto fresh prey. "Move!" Jack barked. They sprinted the rest of the way, bursting into a backlit littered with abandoned vehicles. Jack slammed the gate shut behind them, but the chain link wouldn't hold for long. "Where now?" Lena panted. Jack scanned their surroundings. There, a fire escape, leading up to an old brick apartment complex. It wasn't ideal, but it was high ground. "Up," he ordered. One by one, they scrambled up the ladder. Damien went last, yanking it up behind him just as the first undead slammed against the fence. Their hands clawed at the metal, fingers splitting open, bones grinding against steel. But it wouldn't hold. The building's rooftop gave them a view of the nightmare below. The streets pulsed with movement, hundreds, maybe thousands of them. The horde had grown larger than Jack had feared. They weren't just hunting. They were migrating. "Jesus Christ," muttered Marcus, the youngest of the group. "We need to get out of the city," Lena said, voice tight. Jack wiped sweat from his brow. No argument there. A crash from below made them all freeze. Then another. "Shit," Damien whispered. "That ain't the dead." Jack's stomach twisted. Bandits. They were worse than the undead. The dead killed because they had no choice. The living killed because they could. Footsteps pounded the fire escape. Jack peered over the edge, spotting a group of armed men climbing fast. Their leader, a stocky man with a scar splitting his cheek, grinned up at them. Well, he called, hoisting an axe over his shoulder. "Looks like we found ourselves some strays." Jack leveled his rifle. "Find another rooftop." The man laughed. "Come on, friend. Let's be reasonable." Jack's finger tensed on the trigger. There was no reasoning with men like this. Before he could fire, something changed. A deafening crunch split the air, followed by an eruption of screams. The fence had given way. The undead poured in, dragging down the last of the bandits still on the ground. The rooftop shook as the survivors above watched the chaos unfold. Jack knew an opportunity when he saw one. "Go," he ordered. While they're distracted. They ran, leaping to the next rooftop as the city burned behind them. It was only the beginning. And Jack knew the worst was yet to come. Jack's boots hit the rooftop hard, sending a jolt of pain through his legs. He didn't stop. Behind him, the others followed, their breath ragged as they leaped across the narrow gap between buildings. The city below was a writhing sea of the dead, their moans rising like a sickening chorus. Lena was the last to jump. She barely made it, her foot slipping on the gravel rooftop. Jack caught her wrist, hauling her up just as the alley below was flooded with the infected. "That was too close," she panted. Jack barely heard her. He was scanning the horizon. They needed shelter. Somewhere secure. Somewhere away from the endless hordes. Marcus spoke up between gasps. "We can't keep running like this. We need a plan." Jack nodded, already calculating. "The hospital. It's a few blocks east. If the generators are still running, there might be supplies. Maybe even a safe zone. Or another death trap," Damien muttered. Jack didn't argue. Everything was a risk now. But they had no better options. The hospital. Navigating through the city was a nightmare. Every alley was a dead end, either swarming with the infected or blocked by collapsed buildings. The streets were worse. Burned-out cars and abandoned barricades littered the roads, the remnants of a failed evacuation. Twice, they had to hide as roving bands of scavengers passed by, their voices rough, their weapons blood-stained. Jack had no intention of testing whether they were friendly. By the time they reached the hospital, the sun was dipping below the skyline, casting long shadows over the ruined city. The building loomed ahead, its once sterile facade now streaked with blood and soot. The front doors were shattered. That was a bad sign. Jack led the way, stepping over broken glass as they entered the dimly lit lobby. The place reeked of decay. Old bodies lay slumped in chairs, long since picked clean by the dead. "Stick together," Jack murmured, gripping his rifle tight. The group moved cautiously, their footsteps muffled against the blood-stained tile. Empty gurneys lined the hallways, some overturned, others still occupied by long-dead patients. Lena stepped ahead, peering into a nearby room. "Looks like some of the medical supplies are still intact." That was something, at least. They had lost most of their gear in the last ambush. A fresh supply of bandages, antibiotics, and painkillers could mean the difference between life and death. Jack turned to Marcus and Damien. "Check the upper floors. Look for anything useful. Weapons, food, a defensible spot to hole up in. But stay quiet." The two nodded and disappeared up the stairs. Jack and Lena began sorting through the medical cabinets, taking only what they could carry. That's when they heard it. A voice. Faint. Hoarse. Coming from deeper inside the hospital. Jack and Lena exchanged glances. "Could be a trap," Lena whispered. Jack's gut told him otherwise. He motioned for her to stay close as they followed the sound. At the end of the hall, they found a door. The nameplate read Dr. Henry Lawson. The voice was coming from inside. Jack raised his rifle and pushed the door open. A man sat slumped against the far wall, his lab coat stained with dried blood. He looked up, his face gaunt, his eyes sunken. "You're alive," he rasped. Jack lowered his weapon slightly. "Who are you?" The man coughed, his breath wheezing. "Dr. Lawson." His eyes flicked to Lena. "You're not with them, are you?" Lena frowned. "Them?" Lawson's hands trembled. "The ones who came before. They took everything. They left me here to die. Jack's gut twisted. He had seen this before. Raiders looting hospitals, killing doctors for their supplies, leaving behind only the ones too weak to fight back. Lena knelt beside him, checking his pulse. He's burning up. Lawson grabbed her wrist, his grip weak but urgent. You have to leave. They said they'd come back. Jack's blood ran cold. How many? Lawson coughed again. 6. Maybe more. Armed. He gasped for breath. They've been watching the hospital. Jack glanced at Lena. They had walked straight into a trap. Suddenly, a gunshot echoed through the hospital. Jack's radio crackled to life. Jack! We've got a problem. Damien's voice was frantic. They're here. Jack's heart pounded. No safe haven. Only war. Jack yanked the radio from his belt. Damien, where are they? Second floor, Damien's voice crackled back. They came in quiet, real pros. Marcus and I barely slipped away. They're searching the rooms now. Jack's mind raced. These weren't just some ragtag looters. These men knew what they were doing. That meant one thing, they weren't leaving until they got what they came for. Lena helped Dr. Lawson sit up, but he was in no shape to run. What do we do? She asked. Jack's grip tightened on his rifle. We can't let them pin us down. We split up. I'll cover Damien and Marcus. You get Lawson out of here. Lena hesitated, then nodded. Where do we meet? Jack thought fast. The emergency exit on the west side. If they block it, head for the ambulance bay. Lena helped Lawson to his feet, wrapping his arm around her shoulder. Try not to get shot, Jack. Jack smirked despite himself. No promises. Then he was gone, slipping into the darkened hallway. Hunted. Jack moved fast, keeping low as he made his way toward the stairs. The hospital had gone from eerily quiet to dangerously alive. Somewhere above, boots scraped against tile. Doors creaked open, then slammed shut. The raiders were searching, clearing rooms one by one. His radio crackled. Marcus here. They're close. We're in a storage closet, but it won't hold if they check. Jack hurried up the steps, pausing just outside the second-floor hallway. The emergency lights flickered, casting long, shifting shadows. Then, movement. A man in dark tactical gear passed through a doorway, his rifle sweeping the hall. Jack pressed himself against the wall, heart hammering. This wasn't some desperate scavenger. The guy moved like he had military training. Jack counted 3 more near the nurse's station, whispering among themselves. Too many to take head-on. Then a new voice echoed through the hall. Check downstairs. We're not alone. Jack's gut twisted. Someone had tipped them off. The betrayal. The raiders fanned out, 2 heading toward the stairwell Jack had just come from. He didn't have time to think, only to act. He raised his rifle, took aim at the lead gunman, and fired. The shot tore through the silence. The man crumpled instantly, his partner whipping around in shock. Jack fired again, catching him in the chest. Shouts erupted from down the hall. The other raiders spun toward the sound, their weapons flashing in the dim light. Jack dove into the nearest room as bullets tore through the air. Glass shattered, dust rained from the ceiling, and somewhere in the chaos, a door was kicked open. Fan out, one of them yelled. Jack's breath was steady, his mind cold. He had drawn their attention. That was what mattered. Now Marcus and Damien had a chance to slip out. His radio crackled again. Jack, we're moving. Be careful. Jack exhaled and peeked out from cover. The raiders were advancing cautiously now, their weapons sweeping side to side. They knew he was in here. He only had seconds before they boxed him in. Then. A gunshot. But not from Jack. One of the raiders staggered forward, blood blooming across his back. He dropped to his knees, then collapsed. More gunfire erupted, this time from behind the raiders. Jack's eyes widened. Someone else was shooting at them. Confusion rippled through the remaining raiders as they turned to fire at the unseen attacker. Jack used the distraction to move. He bolted from his hiding spot, cutting down the last man before he could react. The silence that followed was deafening. Jack crept forward, rifle raised. The gunfire had come from the end of the hall. A shadow moved. Jack whirled. And found himself staring down Damien's shotgun. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Damien sighed, lowering the barrel. "Guess you're not the one who sold us out," he muttered. Jack frowned. "What the hell are you talking about?" Damien tilted his head toward the fallen raiders. "They knew we were here, Jack. They weren't just searching the hospital. They were coming for us. Someone gave us up." Jack's blood ran cold. "You think it's one of ours?" Damien's expression was grim. "What else makes sense?" Footsteps echoed from behind them. Jack spun, but it was only Marcus, panting from the sprint. "They're gone," Marcus gasped. "Lena and the doc made it out. But we've got another problem." Jack already knew what he was going to say. "If someone sold us out," Marcus continued, "they're still with us." Jack clenched his jaw. No safe havens. No trust. And now, one of their own was a traitor. Jack didn't say a word as the three of them made their way down to the hospital's west exit. His mind was working too fast, calculating every possibility. Someone had betrayed them. Someone had given their location to the raiders. But who? They reached the exit and found Lena and Dr. Lawson waiting in the alley. The old doctor was weak, leaning against the brick wall, but alive. "Jack." Lena's eyes flicked over him, checking for injuries. "What happened up there?" Jack hesitated, scanning the group. One of them had set them up. He didn't know who. Not yet. So he kept his voice steady. "Raiders are dead. But they knew we were here. Someone tipped them off." Lena's expression hardened. Marcus and Damien exchanged glances. "You saying one of us?" Marcus asked. Jack didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence stretched, heavy and thick. The only sound was Dr. Lawson's labored breathing. Then. A distant moan. Jack stiffened. The others heard it, too. Another moan followed. Then another. Jack turned toward the street. And his stomach dropped. The dead were coming. Nowhere to run. The hospital's west alley had been clear minutes ago, but now it was a death trap. Dozens of infected staggered toward them, drawn by the earlier gunfire. The raiders had been loud. Too loud. And the city had answered. Jack glanced in the other direction. More of them were pouring in from the main road, their rotting bodies shuffling closer, their eyes locked onto fresh prey. They were surrounded. Damien pumped his shotgun. "We need to move. Now." Jack's mind raced. They were boxed in on both sides. The hospital was no longer an option, the raiders' bodies would only attract more of the dead. "The ambulance bay," Lena said suddenly. "It's gated. If we can get inside, we can buy some time." Jack didn't have a better plan. "Go. Now." They ran. The chase. The infected howled as the group bolted toward the ambulance bay. Jack took point, leading them through the maze of overturned gurneys and rusted medical equipment. A screamer lunged from behind a dumpster. Jack didn't slow, He drove his knife into its skull mid-stride, yanking it free without breaking pace. Damien fired a blast over Jack's shoulder, dropping two more that got too close. The ambulance bay was just ahead, a tall chain-link gate, half open. Beyond it, a rusted ambulance sat abandoned, its back doors ajar. Jack sprinted faster, reaching the gate first. He yanked it open and ushered the others inside. Lena and Lawson got through first. Then Marcus. Damien was last. Just as he reached the gate, a hand shot out, an infected grabbed him by the collar. "Shit!" Damien snarled, trying to shake it off. Jack reacted instantly. He slammed the gate shut, crushing the zombie's skull between metal and concrete. Damien stumbled back, panting. That was close. Too close, Jack muttered. But the danger wasn't over. The rising horde. From their new vantage point, they could see just how bad things were. The streets were flooded with the dead. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. "Jesus Christ," Marcus whispered. Lena swallowed hard. "We can't fight that." Jack agreed. "We won't." He turned toward the ambulance. "If it still runs, we drive." Lena climbed into the driver's seat, fumbling with the ignition. "No keys." Jack cursed. Lawson let out a weak laugh. "There's a panel under the steering column. Hotwire it." Lena shot him a look. "How do you know how to hotwire a car?" Lawson just smirked. "You think being a doctor pays well?" Jack wasn't in the mood for jokes. "Just get it started." Lena ripped off the panel and started working on the wires. Outside, the infected were closing in. Damien and Marcus held their weapons at the ready, but Jack knew they couldn't hold out for long. Then, the ambulance roared to life. Jack didn't hesitate. "Everybody in." The doors slammed shut just as the first of the undead reached them. Lena floored the gas. The ambulance lurched forward, smashing through the horde. Bodies slammed against the metal, bones crunched beneath the wheels. They were moving. But the city was far from done with them. No escape yet. Jack watched through the windshield as Lena maneuvered through the wreckage, dodging abandoned cars and flaming debris. The undead were everywhere, swarming like ants. "We can't stay in Chicago," Lena said. "Not like this." Jack nodded. "Agreed. We need to get to the outskirts. Somewhere rural. Fewer people means fewer infected." Marcus frowned. "And what about the traitor?" Silence. Jack turned, eyes scanning the group. Someone had betrayed them. And they were still sitting in the same vehicle. Jack's grip on his rifle tightened. "This isn't over," he said. No one argued. Outside, the city burned. And the dead followed. The ambulance roared through the ruined streets, plowing over anything in its path. Smoke curled from burning cars, and the glow of distant fires painted the skyline in hues of orange and red. The dead still swarmed behind them, a mindless tide of hunger that never tired, never stopped. Inside, the tension was suffocating. Jack kept his rifle across his lap, eyes shifting between his team. They had survived the raiders. Escaped the hospital. But the real threat wasn't just the infected. It was inside the ambulance. Someone had betrayed them. No one spoke. Lena gripped the wheel, focused on weaving through the wreckage. Damien sat shotgun, his fingers twitching near his pistol. Marcus stared out the back window, watching the horde shrink into the distance. Dr. Lawson slumped in the corner, too weak to move, his breaths ragged. Jack exhaled slowly. "Someone sold us out." The words hung in the air like a blade over their heads. Damien scoffed. "And you think it's one of us?" Jack's voice was calm, but firm. "It has to be." No one else knew where we were. Silence. Lena tightened her grip on the wheel. We don't have time for this. We don't have a choice, Jack countered. If we don't figure this out now, we're screwed. Marcus crossed his arms. And what if you're wrong? What if the raiders just got lucky? Jack shook his head. No way. They came in too precise. They knew. He looked around the cramped vehicle. So tell me, who tipped them off? No one answered. Pressure builds. The ambulance swerved suddenly as Lena took a sharp turn, barely missing an overturned semi. The jolt sent Dr. Lawson tumbling forward with a groan. Jack steadied him. You good? Lawson coughed weakly. I'd be better if I wasn't stuck in a rolling death trap. He gave Jack a weak smile, but his eyes darted nervously between the others. You think I'm the traitor, don't you? Jack didn't respond. Lawson chuckled dryly. I've been locked in a hospital for weeks. Who would I even talk to? Good point, Jack admitted. He turned to the others. Damien rolled his eyes. I wouldn't sell us out. You think I'd put my own ass on the line? Jack studied him. You and Marcus split up at the hospital. Where'd you go? Damien glared. Storage room. Trying to find supplies. Alone? Jack pressed. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. We got separated. Jack narrowed his eyes. How convenient. Marcus' jaw tensed. You accusing me now? You got a better explanation? Jack shot back. Marcus stood. I've been fighting alongside you since day one, Jack. You think I'd turn on you now? Jack didn't answer. Lena finally snapped. Enough. We'll get nowhere accusing each other like this. Jack exhaled, rubbing his temple. She was right. But the doubt was planted now, festering like an open wound. We find somewhere safe, Lena continued. Then we figure this out. Jack nodded, but his gut told him nowhere was safe anymore. A dead end. The ambulance rumbled down the empty highway, finally putting distance between them and the city. But as the flames of Chicago faded behind them, a new problem emerged. Fuel. Lena tapped the gauge. We're running on fumes. Jack cursed. How much further? Maybe 5 miles. After that, we're walking. Damien sighed. Perfect. They drove in silence for another mile before Marcus pointed out the window. There. Jack followed his gaze. A small truck stop sat just off the highway, its gas pump still intact. A few abandoned cars littered the lot, but no movement. It looked promising. But Jack had learned the hard way, looks were deceiving. Lena pulled the ambulance to a stop just outside the station. The engine sputtered, struggling to stay alive. This is it, she said. We either find fuel, or we start walking. Jack checked his rifle. We moved together. Quick and quiet. No mistakes. They stepped out into the cold night air. The wind carried the faint sound of distant moans, but for now, the lot was still. Jack led the way, sweeping the area as they approached the station doors. The glass was shattered, dried blood smeared across the walls. The stench of rot filled the air. Lena checked the pumps. No power. Jack cursed. Figures. We check inside, Damien suggested. There might be a generator. Jack hesitated. Something felt off. But they had no choice. He nodded. In and out. No heroics. They moved inside. The aisles were ransacked, shelves toppled over. But something wasn't right. The blood on the floor was fresh. Jack tensed. We're not alone. A noise. Low. Guttural. Then, a scream. Something lunged from the shadows. Jack barely had time to react before a new kind of nightmare descended upon them. The scream tore through the darkness, a twisted mix of agony and hunger. Jack barely had time to react before something lunged from the shadows. A blur of rotting flesh and unnatural speed slammed into Damien, knocking him hard against a shelf. His shotgun flew from his grip as the creature snapped its jaws inches from his throat. This wasn't a regular infected. It was faster. Stronger. Smarter. Jack raised his rifle and fired. The shot punched into the creature's side, but it barely staggered. It twisted its grotesque head toward Jack, snarling, its mouth lined with jagged, mutated teeth. "Oh, hell no," Marcus muttered, grabbing a nearby wrench. Jack fired again, aiming for the head this time. The bullet ripped through its skull, splattering the station wall with blackened blood. The creature spasmed, then collapsed. For a moment, silence. Then, the sound of skittering. Jack's blood ran cold. There were more. A new kind of terror. Lena grabbed Damien's arm, pulling him up. "You okay?" Damien wiped blood from his lip. "No." "What the hell was that?" Jack didn't answer. He was listening. Scratching. Chittering. A low, guttural croaking. Then, from the back of the store, movement. Shelves toppled as 3 more of them emerged. Their bodies were twisted, bones jutted at odd angles, muscles bulging beneath rotted skin. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, locked onto the group with an unnatural hunger. These weren't ordinary zombies. They had evolved. "Run," Jack ordered. A desperate escape. The group bolted for the exit. The creatures screeched and launched forward. One crashed into Marcus, sending him sprawling. Jack turned and fired, 3 shots straight to the chest. It barely slowed. Lena kicked over a metal display rack, trying to slow the others down. Damien grabbed his shotgun, pumping a shell into the nearest creature. The blast tore a chunk from its shoulder, but it kept coming. Jack pulled Marcus to his feet. "Move!" They burst through the glass doors just as the creatures slammed into them from behind. The ambulance was still running, barely. Lena jumped into the driver's seat and floored the gas. The wheel spun for half a second, then the ambulance lurched forward as Jack, Marcus, and Damien dived inside. The creatures shrieked, their clawed hands slamming against the back. One leapt onto the roof. Jack felt the metal bend as the thing crawled across the top. "Shake it off," he shouted. Lena swerved the wheel hard. The creature lost its grip. It tumbled to the pavement and was instantly crushed beneath the back wheels. The remaining monsters vanished into the distance as the ambulance sped down the highway. But Jack knew the truth. They had barely survived. And the world had just gotten a lot worse. What the hell were those things? The ambulance rattled as it sped down the empty road. No one spoke. Finally, Damien broke the silence. "Someone wanna tell me what the hell that was?" "Not normal infected," Marcus muttered, rubbing his bruised ribs. Lena's knuckles were white on the wheel. They were different. Jack stared out the window, his mind racing. Faster. Stronger. Smarter. Dr. Lawson coughed weakly from the corner. "I've seen something like that before." All eyes turned to him. Jack narrowed his gaze. "Explain." The doctor hesitated. "Back at the hospital, we had rumors. People who got bitten but didn't turn right away. Some got stronger. More violent. Some started changing." Jack's stomach twisted. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" Lawson sighed. "Would you have believed me?" Jack didn't answer. Because the truth was, he wasn't sure. No safe haven. They drove in silence for nearly an hour before Lena spoke. "We're running on fumes." Jack checked the map. They were far from the city now, the roads empty except for wreckage and abandoned vehicles. "We'll need to stop soon," Lena added. Jack sighed. "We stick to back roads. Keep moving until we find somewhere defensible." "How about a cabin?" Marcus suggested. "Less people means less infected." Jack nodded. "Agreed." But a new thought gnawed at his mind. If the virus was evolving, then nowhere was safe. And worse, the traitor was still among them. Jack glanced at the others, his grip tightening on his rifle. The monsters outside weren't the only ones he had to worry about. The real danger was inside the ambulance. The ambulance sputtered, jerking slightly as Lena struggled to keep it moving. They had been running on fumes for the past 10 miles, and Jack knew they wouldn't make it much farther. "Just a little more," Lena muttered, gripping the wheel. Jack sat in the front passenger seat, scanning the dense tree line. They had left the highway nearly an hour ago, taking an old, winding road deep into the woods. The fewer people that had lived in an area before the outbreak, the fewer infected there would be. At least, that was the hope. "See anything?" Damien asked from the back. Jack exhaled. "Not yet." Then, he saw it. A cabin, nestled between the trees. It was large, 2 stories, and most importantly, intact. The windows were boarded up, and a rusted pickup truck sat abandoned in the driveway. Jack pointed. "There. That's our best shot." Lena didn't hesitate. She turned the wheel, guiding the ambulance down the dirt path leading up to the cabin. The vehicle groaned one last time before finally dying, rolling to a stop just a few feet from the porch. They had made it. But for how long? Securing the cabin. Jack stepped out first, rifle raised. The woods were eerily silent. No moans. No movement. That either meant the area was clear, or something was waiting. Marcus checked the truck. No keys. Useless. Lena climbed the porch steps and tested the front door. Locked. Jack motioned for Damien. "Kick it in." Damien nodded, bracing himself before slamming his boot into the wood. The door cracked open, revealing a dark interior. Jack led the way, sweeping the room with his rifle. The inside was dusty but untouched. A fireplace, an old couch, wooden furniture. The kitchen was small but intact. "No bodies," Lena whispered. "That's a good sign." Jack didn't relax just yet. They cleared the downstairs, nothing. Then, carefully, they moved to the second floor. Jack pushed open a bedroom door. The bed was messy, but the room was empty. A hunting rifle rested in the corner. The next room was the same. When they reached the last door at the end of the hall, Jack felt his gut tighten. Something felt off. He pushed it open. Inside, a chair sat in the middle of the room. A body was slumped over it, dried blood pooled beneath it. A bullet hole in the skull. Suicide. "Jesus," Damien muttered. Jack stepped inside, scanning the walls. Scribbled notes covered them, written in frantic handwriting. "They change. Not normal. It learns." Lena swallowed. "This guy saw what we did." Jack clenched his jaw. They needed to barricade this place fast. The truth comes out. Once they secured the cabin, Jack gathered the group in the living room. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows. Jack crossed his arms. "We need to talk about the traitor." Marcus groaned. "Again?" Jack ignored him. "The raiders found us because someone told them. And that someone is in this room." Silence. Lena leaned forward. We don't have time for this. Jack cut her off. We make time. His gaze hardened. Because if we don't, we're all dead. Damien scoffed. And how exactly do you plan to figure it out? Jack reached into his pack and pulled out a radio. The one they had taken from the raiders. I found this on one of them, Jack said. It's programmed to a private frequency. His eyes flicked to each of them. And it's still active. Lena's face paled. You mean? Jack nodded. Whoever contacted the raiders is still in touch with them. Marcus tensed. We check it, then. Jack exhaled. We will. He turned the dial. Static hissed. Then. A voice crackled through. You copy? Do you have them? The group froze. Jack lifted the radio, his heart pounding. The voice continued. Did they make it out? Silence stretched. Then, Marcus bolted for the door. Jack reacted instantly. Stop him. Damien lunged, tackling Marcus to the ground. Marcus thrashed, trying to break free. You son of a bitch. Damien snarled. Jack grabbed Marcus by the collar, slamming him against the floor. You sold us out. Marcus sneered. You don't get it, do you? He spat blood. It doesn't matter. They're coming. Jack's stomach twisted. Marcus grinned. And this time, they're bringing something worse. The final stand begins. Jack didn't waste time. He turned to Lena. How much time do we have? Lena grabbed the radio and listened. They're close. Jack's mind raced. They were out of gas. Trapped. They had two choices, run and die tired, or stand and fight. Jack turned to Damien. We fortify. Now. Damien nodded. Let's give them hell. Lena grabbed supplies from the kitchen. Damien reinforced the doors with furniture. Jack double-checked their weapons. Marcus sat in the corner, tied up, smirking. You're all dead. Jack ignored him. He had one last trick. He grabbed the hunting rifle from upstairs and handed it to Lena. They want us? Let's make them earn it. She nodded. Outside, the wind howled. And in the distance, the sound of engines rumbled toward them. The final battle was coming. The rumble of engines echoed through the trees. The raiders were coming. Jack stood by the window, gripping his rifle, heart pounding. This was it. They had no escape, no reinforcements. Just themselves, their weapons, and whatever time they could buy. Lena crouched near the stairs, shotgun loaded. Damien checked the last barricade, his knuckles white. Dr. Lawson, too weak to fight, hid in a back room. And Marcus, the traitor, sat tied to a chair, a smug grin plastered on his bloodied face. Jack turned to his team. We make our stand here. We hold this cabin, or we die trying. No one argued. There was no point. Outside, headlights cut through the trees. 5 vehicles. Armed men. And something else. A shadow moved between them, too fast, too twisted. Jack's stomach twisted. The raiders hadn't come alone. They brought one of the mutants. The first shot. A voice boomed from outside. Jack Reese. Jack stiffened. They knew his name. You have something we want. The leader stepped forward, a grizzled man with a shaved head, body covered in scars. Hand over the doctor, and we'll make this quick. Jack exhaled. Go to hell. The raider sighed. Shame. Then he raised his hand. Gunfire erupted. Lena fired first, taking out a raider who was sprinting toward the porch. Damien unloaded his shotgun, blasting through the windshield of a truck. The raiders returned fire, bullets punching into the cabin's wooden walls. Jack stayed low, taking careful shots. His rifle snapped off rounds, dropping another enemy. Then came the screech. Jack turned just in time to see the mutant charging. It barreled through a raider, crushing him under its weight. Its limbs were twisted, jagged bones protruding from its flesh. Its mouth, lined with serrated teeth, opened in a howl of rage. And it was coming straight for the cabin. The monster unleashed. "Move!" Jack shouted. The creature slammed into the barricade, sending debris flying. The door splintered, but held. Lena aimed her shotgun and fired point blank. The blast tore into its shoulder, but it barely flinched. It lunged. Jack tackled Lena out of the way just as claws raked across the air where she had stood. Damien swung his bat, smashing it across the creature's head, but it grabbed him, lifting him off the ground. Damien choked, kicking wildly. "Kill it!" Jack aimed and fired. The bullet punched through its skull. The monster staggered, then slammed Damien into the wall before collapsing. Damien groaned, coughing. "I hate this world." Jack didn't have time to respond, because the raiders were still coming. "Marcus, last play." Marcus chuckled from his chair. "You're all screwed." Jack turned, rage boiling over. He grabbed Marcus by the collar. "Why? Why sell us out?" Marcus smirked, blood on his lips. "Because the strong survive. And you? You're just delaying the inevitable." Jack's grip tightened. Then, a flash of movement. Marcus lunged forward, biting Jack's arm. Pain exploded through him. Jack roared in agony, yanking his arm back. Blood dripped from the wound. Marcus grinned. "Welcome to the end." Jack didn't hesitate. He pulled his gun and shot Marcus in the head. The traitor slumped over, dead. Lena gasped. "Jack, your arm." Jack clenched his jaw. He was infected. One last stand. The raiders pushed forward, breaking through the last barricade. Jack didn't care anymore. He grabbed a Molotov from the kitchen, lit it, and hurled it at the front door. Flames erupted, engulfing the entrance. The raiders screamed as fire licked at their bodies. Lena shot another. Damien took down 2 more. Then, silence. The remaining raiders fled into the woods. The battle was over. But Jack's fight was just beginning. The final goodbye. Lena rushed to Jack, eyes wide with fear. "We can stop it. Cut off the arm." Jack shook his head. It was too late. The infection was already spreading. His veins darkened. His body felt heavy. Damien clenched his fists. "No. We don't leave you." Jack smiled weakly. "You have to." Lena's eyes filled with tears. "Jack, please." Jack reached into his pocket, pulling out his last bullet. "Take the truck," he rasped. "Find somewhere safe." Lena sobbed. Damien cursed. But they knew, this was the end for him. Jack turned toward the burning battlefield. He felt the infection crawling up his neck, sinking into his bones. He loaded his final round. As the flames consumed the cabin, Jack stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next. His last words echoed in the firelight. "Go." And then, he was gone. End of Part 8.